Yeah, well, I always wanted to do a TED talk, and I
Mhm.
applied like 3 years in a row to speak at my local TEDx, and it became very apparent to me after a couple of failed attempts that I needed to have something worthwhile to say, or they wouldn't accept me on as a speaker. They get like between 75 and 100 applications every year. At that,
Mm.
just at my local one. So if it wasn't, kind of locked down, a good idea, the idea is it's an idea worth spreading. That was the TEDx motto at the time. So it has to
Mm.
be an idea. And I was thinking to myself, what is the thing that I think the idea that's out there is wrong, and the idea that I'm working on is right?
Cool. Welcome, Tim. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Good to see you.
Yeah. We're just going to have a bit of a chit chat about hypnotherapy and about what you've been up to as well. And
Sounds good.
it's nice to kind of talk to someone who's in the field. And I guess for people who are maybe curious about hypnotherapy or becoming a hypnotherapist,
Mhm.
that's the sort of thing that maybe if I was sitting there years ago going, what is this profession even about?
Mm.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
talking to someone like yourself, and that may give some clarity.
Yeah, lovely.
So
That sounds like a good shout. Yeah.
tell me a little bit about yourself, and what got you into being a hypnotherapist to begin with.
Okay, so well, I mean, you know a bit of my story because obviously I'm sort of we've chatted about this before, but originally, I say originally, not like my first go at a career, but a while ago, 15 or so years ago, I was a plumber, which was not my most natural of sort of, I don't know, pastimes or professions, because I'm more of a sort of conceptual thinker than I am a practical doer, hands on. But my dad had a plumbing company, and my cousin now runs that plumbing company. So it was just a family plumbing business, and I was desperate to get out of it because I didn't like plumbing at all. It really wasn't my thing. So it just caused me to sort of slightly more aggressively and proactively pursue some various interests, and hypnotism was one of them. But it wasn't like a therapeutic interest. It was just, I was vaguely interested in magic, and I learnt to juggle and stuff like that. It was just
Mm.
one of those random things that you're interested in. And it was purely by accident that I got into the therapeutic side of it, when I learned hypnosis, and then one of my friends wanted me to help her stop biting her nails, and I had no idea how to do it, but I had this sort of stumbled, poor half-assed effort at doing it, and lo and behold, we got this amazing result, and she stopped biting her nails, even though she'd been traditionally biting them down to the point where they were bleeding. So, and I look back on what we did then, and it was so clumsy, and it was so sort of, ill-advised in terms of helping someone therapeutically when you're only just trained in the basics. But yeah, and it just fired up my passion for it, and I just thought, this is actually what I want to do with my life. This is better than plumbing. It's better than fixing toilets. So I kind of went in that direction, and then I was mentored by the late great John Chase, who is very. I mean, some of the people watching this podcast might not know of him, but 10 years ago he was probably one of the leading lights in the UK in terms of hypnosis training. He stepped away from it in his later years, but he's very well known in the UK hypnosis community, and to be fair, worldwide. And I got very close to him, was mentored by him, he became a very good friend, and yeah, just helped me. I don't know, fast tracked my understanding and the work I was doing, and it's really interesting that by the time we sort of stopped working together, um, we probably disagreed on most things about hypnosis, to be fair, because I went out there and started to practice, and just found my own way, and I got my own ideas about it. So, and we would have long discussions about it in terms of how it worked and how it didn't work. And yeah, which I think, he always said to me, he said, that's what my job is as a mentor, is not to make you a version of me, but to get to the point
Mm.
where you're teaching me things. And I thought that was quite good. He had a good perspective on it in that way, I think.
Nice.
But that was
The control system, Tim, you came up with, I guess, your own way of working with clients. Do you want to share a little bit about that perspective and how you came about it?
yeah. So I think the overview of the control system is that it's kind of a hypnotherapeutic method that doesn't require any formal induction or trance process. The client is kind of eyes open, wide awake at all times. We're still using phenomena. We're still doing direct phenomena-based kind of hypnotic interaction, if you like,
Mm,
but it's not eyes closed or trancey, and there's no sort of scripts, suggestions, language patterns. There's a lot of the things that traditionally people believe to be like essential parts of hypnosis. It does without that. And for me, it's just a nice direct way of working, and it empowers the client because they're involved in it. It's kind of a collaborative process rather than
mm,
me doing something to you. So and it just came about from a mixture of the way I was taught, my experiences with various clients, and just my general character in terms of how I like to go about things. So it's not,
mm,
I always say this to people that I'm training. I'm not saying it's a better method than anyone else's method. It's just when I use it, the client gets a better version of me because I'm doing stuff that I believe in rather than stuff that I think might be kind of like redundant, or
mm,
unnecessary. So I wanted to trim the fat off of my process so that we could just get down to the stuff that really works and that helps the client. And again, I would credit John a little bit as well, because I think initially I was always taught to hypnotize by eliciting some degree of phenomena before then inducing a formal trance state. So, like the example, I suppose, would be, when people do like an eye lock induction, where you get
mm,
the eyes closed, and the old Elman thing where you first get them to test that they can't open their eyes, and sometimes you'll get them like, oh my god, I can't, they'll react to the fact they can't open their eyes. And
mm,
every induction I was ever taught included that moment of something happening automatically, kind of that
mm,
subconscious involvement before we then suggest or encourage the client to sort of drift off consciously, as it were. So that
mm,
was very much a big bit of learning for me. I've always assumed that's the way to do it. And at some point, a bit of me said, well, if we've got the subconscious forward and doing stuff, why do we actually need to go like deeper and deeper and relax more and more? What's the deep breathing for, and what's the relaxation of the muscles for? And then, you kind of realize, well, I can work with the client's subconscious, without having to do that sort of more ritualistic process. And that was a
mm.
big, as a big liberating moment for me when I sort of, started working with clients that way, and realized we could get just as good results.
Mm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think when you're trained, there is this, I guess, stock standard training process where you have to learn all about what hypnosis is and how to do the inductions and
Yeah.
suggestions, and then you go and practice. But it's not going to be for everyone. And I think for me, being script bound, for example, wasn't for me.
Yeah.
I cannot stand a script. Um, I'm really believe that the client has the answer, and
Yeah.
as long as you're tuning into that
Yeah.
and you're holding space, the client will do the work.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of people still are very script bound and still very methodical about how they work with each
Yeah,
client.
I totally get that. I mean, you'll see this on like forums, like on Facebook or in like groups where people are asking for scripts for a certain issue.
Yeah.
And I always, I think that sort of reveals that people are misunderstanding what we're doing. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's no magic words here. It's not like these words will equal this result. It's like you're dealing with a human being, and that human being is very unique to themselves. They have their own idiosyncrasies, their own ways of understanding what's going on. And our first job is to listen rather than say, right, give me the magic words to apply when I get this person in hypnosis.
Mm,
Yeah, I agree with you totally. Even though I'm not. I mean, I sort of took a lot of education from Bob Burns on this one, where I was very anti-scripts, and Bob sort of kind of tentatively defends it a little bit, because he said, well, most of us, though, we start out by learning some scripts so that we know, we've got something we can fall back on when we get to that point in a session when we're like, what happens now? What do I do? When we're sort of feeling a bit tongue tied, because obviously we're not all going to go straight into our first session and just know what we want to say and how we want to guide the client, that kind of thing. So I'm with you. I think that I'm not a fan of scripts, but I also sort of, I concede that point to Bob that, I suppose they have their place, and I suppose it comes back to what you were saying, that we learn certain things, but then we start to develop our own way of working, don't we?
For sure. And I think having the foundation and understanding why it's doing what it does, that can be useful, because let's say the art of positive belief in that client and framing it that way, using language in that way, can be very, very powerful. And I think that positive regard to that client is part of what allows the client permission to be their best self.
Yeah.
If you can be that cheerleader in there, they're more likely to have a positive outcome.
Yeah, I think it took me a long time to understand the role that we were playing in this interaction. I think, John's teachings were very direct, and his model was, I am the hypnotist and I am doing this to you, which didn't sit right with me, just because I'm not that sort of person. I'm not the kind of direct hypnotist. I'm not going to shout sleep at you and hope that your eyes close and you drop on the floor. It's just not me. So I had to find a way of working with it, but I wanted to be direct. I wanted to use like phenomena-based stuff, and I wanted to feel like a hypnotist. And it was a bit like, well, how does that correlate? How do I kind of resolve that conflict in me that wants to be quite dynamic as a hypnotist, but at the same time understand that I'm not doing stuff to you. It's a collaboration. It's the like you say, the client finding the stuff within them. And I think when I started to formulate my own idea in terms of what I think is going on when it comes to change work, I think that answered a lot of questions for me. I think I'd always thought we were trying to sort of override patterns of thought, and I didn't fully understand at the time the importance of listening to what the client brings, because I think I spoke about this at the conference when I was talking, but we have a place where we are, we have a certain pattern of thought that we're running at the moment, and we have a good idea hopefully of the pattern of thought we'd rather be running, whatever that might be. And normally, of course, we upgrade all the time as human beings. We see a better way of being, a better thought pattern, and we change it. But the reason we're not is because there's barriers in the way. And those barriers obviously take the form of our certain belief systems, things that we regard as true, that has us saying, oh yeah, over here looks great, but we can't get here because this thing's in the way, by the way, and whatever that truth is. And that's why I think listening is the first thing to do. Because it's like, okay, tell me what the barrier is. Because if I can understand that, I reckon probably we could easily come up with an answer as to why that doesn't need to be here anymore. But if we don't listen, we've got no idea at all. And then we're just reading a script, hoping that it covers the areas that need to be covered,
Absolutely. I think there are definitely two clear schools of thought with hypnotherapists that are out there. And I get it. Not everyone feels creative enough or can ad-lib maybe in the real time. And so they lean into the script. But I do invite people to take the trainer wheels and just have a go to sort of see how it is to be a bit more organic with your client, and maybe go into
I totally agree
some
with that.
tools.
Yeah. I think when you think about it, all we're really doing, we're trying to convey an idea. That's it, aren't we? And every single human being on the planet, especially people that have come to train as hypnotherapists, they're all probably quite used to describing to people something they would want them to do. So, it doesn't matter what job you're doing. When I was a plumber, I had to explain to people what I'm doing and why this is going to work, and why you can trust me with your pipe work, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I had to communicate. And if we can communicate an idea, then we can be a hypnotherapist, because that's all we're doing is communicating an idea. I think that, that was another big thing for the way I wanted to work. I wanted to turn what might be perceived as this mystical change work process into a simple conversation between me, the therapist, and the client's subconscious. Yeah, if that makes sense. And I think that's why I've always wanted to kind of work in a way where I did get direct feedback from the subconscious, so that I can have an interaction. because I think of it this way: you've got two people, hopefully, that are both working towards the goal. The client is working towards the goal they know they want, and you, as a therapist, are just trying to help them get to the goal they want. So, a
Mm.
conversation should help us get there. Two people working towards the same goal. That should be pretty straightforward to get where we need to get. And I think that's for me is the overarching theme here. Let's keep it simple, make it a very simple, direct communication, and we'll probably get the result we want. Yeah.
Mm. I mean, most people, even just through a chat with a good friend, is going to be utilizing the phenomena of conversational hypnosis. If you're in rapport, if you feel heard, and if you have a chance to process something, you're going to upgrade. You're going to move through whatever that potential mental block might have been.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is interesting, our profession, because a lot of people do look at a hypnotherapist as being someone who takes over, or they're going to go to sleep, somehow wake up and they're all fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just, dismantling some of those ideas can be quite interesting. It has changed. I do believe we have got better over the years at educating
I
the
think
general public.
I think we have, because I think most of the more prominent trainers now work upon that model, that we know that it's a guiding process rather than a doing process. There's still people out there that work with that very direct model, but generally speaking, even people that are training this are generally, they're using stuff. If they're working on that framework of I am the hypnotist doing stuff to you, you'll probably find that it's based on kind of historical figures, like in our hypnosis history, if you like, and they're basing their methods upon their teachings. There's very few people these days that are saying this is how I've come to work based on my experiences with clients, who are just doing a direct I'm gonna hypnotize you and you're going to do as you're told sort of model, and I think as a result our profession continues to improve, but I don't think it becomes less magical either. I think that's the thing that I always resisted about this idea that it was a collaborative process, was that, but then we're not doing the magical hypno stuff, are we? But yeah, we are, but we're just utilizing it in a way that allows the client, if you like, to take away all of that knowledge, all of that understanding, so that they can feel empowered to deal with future challenges, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that power of possibility, when the client comes in, they're already seeking change. The first thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they've already started to decide, I'm changing something today. What that is, who knows? What's your take on, I guess, the intake form? Let's go there for a moment.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
What does that look like for you in your world?
Okay, for me, so I had no idea about an intake form. Yeah, and I wasn't, John didn't teach what do you do, what questions you ask your client. He was just like, right, I'll teach you to hypnotize them and tell them to stop it. That was about it. So when it came to an intake form, I sort of went to Barry Thane, who's another very good hypnotist in this country. Again, a bit of a legend from my perspective. And he had a training out, a DVD training. So I basically just copied his intake form that was on his training DVD, and there were loads of questions on there. I didn't know why I was asking it, but they were just questions he asked, and it was this huge long thing, and it took like half an hour to go through, or something like. Just that was if the answers were simple as well. If you got one where there was a complicated answer, God knows how long you'd be there. So and then I sort of started to think, hang on, what do I actually want to know? For in this instance. So now I'm doing an initial consultation with a client that for me is always a free consultation, because what I want to discover in that consultation is whether or not we can work together. Yeah. And I don't believe in charging money until I've established that. Yeah. So, and I've got about 15 or so questions. Yeah, and a couple of them are what's your name and what's your contact number. So it's not like I have this really detailed intake form. But I want to know what we're here to work on. I want to see if they've got some idea of why they've got the issue right now. Yeah, in terms of where do we think it came from, or I want to know how it's manifesting to them day to day, how it impacts them. I want to know all the standard, health and safety stuff and that kind of thing. I don't want to just scoot over that. But I think the most important question for me in an intake form is, how will you know that this is sorted? Yeah,
Mm.
what's the thing that's gonna happen where, previously you would have responded in this way, but oh, now I'm responding in this way instead, because if we can
Yes.
get that, then we've got a couple of things there. We've got a very clear target of what, this pattern of thought is that we're after. And we know that we won't just sail past it without noticing. We know where the finish
Mm.
line is. So we'll give ourselves the credit of the great change that we've made. So yeah, that's kind of my basic thing when it comes to an intake form. But for me, the questions you ask, that's one part of it. I think then you got to explain to people how this is all going to potentially work, so that you've got the information you need from them in terms of what we're here to do. Maybe they've got some information now about how it's going to work for them, and then also I just want to check that they can respond okay hypnotically to what we want to do. I'll always do some little exercises in the consultation, and if they can respond, that's great. I can then say, right, I'm happy to go ahead if you are. But if they can't respond, then unfortunately, it might not be the right method for them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a person needs to feel comfortable with their therapist,
Mm.
and if that's not in the room, they're going to instantly become more on, defensive of anything you might want them to collaborate with.
Yeah.
Their guards up.
Yeah, well, exactly. I
Yeah.
think we say rapport, isn't it? It's the
Yes. Yeah.
cornerstone. It's the bedrock of everything that we do. I think if we've got a good rapport with a client, the method we
Mm.
use could be the most rubbish, half-assed method in the world, but you still probably will get a good result because you've got a good connection with the person and you know where you're going. If you've got no
Mm.
rapport, you could have the most magical method that the world has ever seen, and you'd get nowhere
Yep.
because you just wouldn't get the
Exactly.
engagement from the client's subconscious. So I
Yeah.
think you've got to make sure there's a connection there. Yeah.
Can I ask you a bit of a curly question actually about rapport and about, I guess, the generation coming out? And there's a lot more ADHD happening. There's a
Mhm.
lot more sort of
Yeah.
people who have maybe on a spectrum somewhere where their ability to regulate their emotions is maybe not as fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, what have you noticed there in the way of working with them? Because I do think sometimes we need to adapt a bit more patience with some
Yeah.
of the generational things that are happening now. They don't tend to have as much resilience, I feel.
Mm.
So to talk to them directly, quite often we've got to kind of read the room really carefully, otherwise they can take offence or get into a bit of a strange place emotionally.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying there. I think that can be a difficult thing, because with some clients, you'll be able to, by the time you're into like a session or two in, you can muck around with them in the same way you would with your best mate because there's just a good
Mm,
connection there. And then there's other
mm,
clients where oh, I feel like I'm on my best behavior while we're chatting here, and I get that
yeah.
totally. I'm not, so when it comes to like generational thing in terms of, the younger clients coming through the process now,
Mm,
because I don't work with under 18s for a start. I don't work with kids. So
right.
everyone that I'm working with is an adult. So
Mm,
they've hopefully done, this full developmental process emotionally. But I don't know. I think it's just, for me, I don't really pay attention to whether a client is saying that they're on the spectrum or they're ADHD and things like that, because my interest is in the individual. So I'm
mm,
like, you can tell me like, oh, I've got ADHD. Yeah. And I know that what that means to you might be something completely different to what it meant to the last client that said that to me. So I'm not necessarily going to put any extra strategies in place in terms of gaining rapport or maintaining rapport. All I'm going to do is take my cues from the individual in front of me. And bearing in mind, I'm working online all the time, so I don't get as many
mm,
like body language cues as we might get in the room with each other and things like that. But I tend to think, hopefully we're quite good, as human beings. If our intent is to, you were using the phrase holding space, yeah, if our intent is to do that for the client, then I think, subconsciously we will do everything we need to
mm,
connect with that person, and if we ultimately can't, they won't go ahead with any work, and we probably would turn down working with the client anyway. So it sort of regulates itself. Yeah.
mm,
um I just think as long as we're not being clumsy. As long as we're here, my
mm,
whole training on rapport building is like, make sure you have a genuine interest in what the client is telling you and what they want. Yeah. And that's it. If you have a genuine interest and you're invested in their result, then, as therapists, I feel like we will very naturally do what is necessary to create and maintain that rapport. Because, and this is what I think is the problem with trainings in rapport, is that
mm,
they train you to do things very consciously, with the whole mirroring and matching and stuff like that. It's like we don't do that consciously. It's the mistaken idea that because we observed when people were in rapport, they seemed to mirror each other's body language. That
mm,
idea that then, if we just do that deliberately, then that means we will get rapport with the person. It's just completely round the wrong way, And if you focus on rapport building exercises, so you listen to their language, whether they're using visual metaphors or auditory metaphors and things like that, you've just missed exactly what they said to you because you were paying attention to how they were saying it instead. So I think by the time we get to the point where I'm choosing a career for myself, and that career is hypnotherapy, you've probably trained yourself super diligently in building rapport anyway, even with the most
mm,
difficult people, because you've had to. We've all gone through a schooling process where we've been chucked in with people who we didn't necessarily choose to be with and had to make the
mm,
best of it and get on with people. So we probably are quite well trained at noticing when people are not resonating with what we're saying, or are saying things in a certain way and wouldn't appreciate me saying it in a different way, that kind of thing.
mm,
If we pay attention and we're invested, I think we should pick up on those things, and we should maintain that stuff pretty well.
mm. Yeah, curious um, minds, I think, do well as hypnotherapists because you
Yeah,
want to be curious about people.
yeah,
And also, again, that positive regard towards humanity, that you believe in humans to be better and do better and sort of
yeah,
want to see that change, want to see that
yeah,
positive
exactly.
outcome. Yeah, it's one of the interesting things over the 30 plus years I've been doing this as a hypnotherapist. I
Mm.
feel joyous coming in and working with people,
Yeah,
even after all of those years, because you end up seeing people break through things that they've been carrying as a burden for such a long time, and
mm.
you see proper results.
Yeah,
It's not just talk therapy where they go round and round and round and round and sort
mm.
of almost amplify the stuckness for
Yeah,
some. Yeah, it's very solution orientated.
yeah.
You talked at a TEDx talk
Mm.
about how to stop feeling anxious about feeling anxiety.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Tell me a little bit about that. I'm just curious.
What, in terms of like the process and doing that, or getting the talk, or just all of it, really?
Um, More about the kind of theme of what you were sort of wanting to share with the
Well,
world, because
okay, so yeah,
on that stage, you've got a message, right?
yeah, well, I always wanted to do a TED talk, and I
Mhm,
applied like 3 years in a row to speak at my local TEDx, and it became very apparent to me after a couple of failed attempts that I needed to have something worthwhile to say, or they wouldn't accept me on as a speaker. They get like between 75 and 100 applications every year. At that,
mm,
just at my local one. So if it wasn't kind of locked down, a good idea. The idea is it's an idea worth spreading. That was the TEDx motto at the time. So it has to
mm,
be an idea. And I was thinking to myself, what is the thing that I think the idea that's out there is wrong, and the idea that I'm working on is right. Yeah, so it's like what's a new and anxiety was the thing that jumped out at me. This idea that anxiety is represented to everyone online, and in the zeitgeist now as an illness. We don't talk
mm,
about anxiety unless we're talking about an anxiety disorder now, or we're talking about anxiety as a bad thing. And the whole and what we experience, I'd seen enough anxiety clients by that time to know that the issue wasn't really I'm anxious about my health, or I'm anxious about social interactions. The problem was I'm anxious about my anxiety issue. Yeah, so it was the Claire Weeks thing, the second fear. And so I wanted to put a talk out there that was geared all around that idea that anxiety was the bad guy, anxiety was the enemy, and actually it's not. It's actually our best friend who's working really hard to look after us, steer us towards happiness, keep us safe, all that sort of thing. And that's why it was called How to Stop Feeling Anxious About Anxiety, because it was, there was the line in it that I think when I did a pitch night, there was a pitch night where loads of people came down to pitch their talks. And I know the phrase that I did, that I said that I think got me the talk, and that ended up in the final talk, was the idea that there's only two types of people that don't feel anxiety, and that's dead people and psychopaths. And I know that was the one that they liked, and they thought that's a good soundbite. That explains your point, I think. You know what I mean? That encapsulates it. And so I think when we came across that, we centered on that. That was a good focus for the talk. And then it was just about trying to get it in under 18 minutes, everything that I wanted to say about anxiety, which was really, really difficult. And I think it was, in the end, it was like 18 minutes and 6 seconds or something like that when you look back at the YouTube video of it. So I didn't quite manage it, but they let it go, fortunately. And then it was just write the thing, practice the thing, learn the thing, because you have to know it word for word as well, which is the weirdest thing in the world. I do a lot of public speaking now, but I never do the whole I'm going to learn it word, like a script. Like we were saying, we just say how much we hate scripts, yeah. And I never do that. I just have certain points I want to make, and I discuss around those points, and then I can feed off of the audience and what they're, if they got questions or if they got any comments or if they're responding to certain parts of it. But then it's like, oh, I need to know every word. And then it's going to be filmed for YouTube, and it's going to be in front of 300 people in the theater as well. So you're like, wow, that's a different level of pressure in terms of getting it right. So the first line of the talk is, "Hello, I'm Tim Box, and I feel anxious." and I thought I sort of knew I would. Do you know what I mean? Because of course, why wouldn't I? And again, it perfectly made the point from word go that that's okay, because I think it's appropriate to feel anxious talking in front of 300 people about something I care passionately about. So that was kind of the theme of it. And I think, my YouTube channel now is based all around that. After the TED talk went up on you, because all of the TEDx talks that anyone ever does anywhere in the world, they go up on YouTube, and some of them get a lot of views, some of them get no views at all, and I was fortunate. I say fortunate, it landed online about the same time COVID started. Yeah. And, just when the world got really, really anxious and was stuck in their homes on their laptop, Googling, how do I stop feeling anxious? So it got a lot of eyes on it, and it's had about 3 million views now. And so as a result, loads of people were finding my YouTube channel. So I went from having 0 subscribers to having, like, I don't know, about 1,000 subscribers. It wasn't huge, but I was like, why am I getting more? Oh, that's right, because of that TED Talk thing. So then I started to make videos about anxiety. And now, that's every week I put a new video up. That's kind of like my main social media output, is to talk about anxiety on the YouTube channel. So and it's just expanding on this theme and a few others as well surrounding that theme, in terms of what anxiety is compared to what people say it is, and and just kind of de-escalating the perceived level of threat from feeling anxious, so that people can then stop feeling anxious about anxiety, basically. And that's the vibe of it.
When we're working with clients, obviously the power of the good question is a big part of what we do. For me, if I'm curious about a client and wanting to know what's happening, I'm using a more global, open-ended question about, so tell me what happens when you experience this anxiety, and it just kind of opens them up.
Yeah.
How do you go about kind of that inquiry?
Oh, that's a really good question, because I don't think I have a formalized structure to questioning people. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily have a strategy about that. I work on the very basic principle that is, if we go for our target in terms of how we want to feel, we'll very quickly hit the barrier in terms of what it is, what the issue that is currently going on. I want to know. I want to feel like I understand that bit of your subconscious that is putting the barrier up. I want to feel like I get it. So there's things I
mm,
might ask. So why do you think you feel this way?
mm,
Where do you think it came from? That's
yeah,
if we were to ask that bit of your mind to change this, why do you think it might say no? Yeah,
mm,
that kind of vibe to it. But even though I do more listening now than I used to when I started out, I still think, weirdly enough, I do more talking. Yeah, which probably half an hour into this, everyone's watching this saying, "Yeah, I can imagine that actually, Tim, just from listening to you." But I but I think I do as much as a good question it
mm,
is great. I like a good insight as well. I like a
mm,
good like reframe, if you like, in terms of what's going on there. So I had a client
mm,
last week as an example who I knew the whole issue was that he was he was trying to be perfect and he saw feeling anxious as a sign of weakness, and that's why he was
mm,
desperately trying hard to get rid of his anxiety. He was the sort of guy that, I see a problem, I sort it out, I take action, I get it done. He was a very high achiever, high performer type, which I see a lot
mm,
of, to be fair. And he was applying the same principle to himself. Right, anxiety, got to eradicate that, got to get rid of that anxiety completely. And of course, as we know, the more you focus on something as important, potentially the more anxiety you create around it, because that's the emotion your mind uses to focus you on the important stuff, is anxiety. Yeah. So it's like the harder he tried to get rid of it, the more anxiety he was generating. So I had to
mm,
sort of explain to him that it's the doing that's the problem. Yeah, you want to do something about it, but it's the doing that's the problem, because you're telling yourself that what's happening is wrong and you have to do something about it. And as soon as he started to like conceptualize this point, I see. So I've been looking at it like all my other issues, rather than the way I need to look at it, like this isn't an issue that needs me to do something about it. Yeah,
mm,
I need to just allow anxiety to be what it is without labeling it as a malfunction, and then I'll feel less anxious without even trying to do that. So for me, if I can listen to what the client says, and I'm like, oh, I can see the barrier. Yeah, I can see why your mind is stopping you getting to where you want to get to. Then
mm.
I'm that sort of therapist that will, and I'm happy to say to clients, look, I fear I might talk more than you today. Yeah, and sometimes they're like, "Oh, that's great," because that was what I was worried about. I was going to have to tell my whole bloody story again.
Yeah, yeah,
And so there will be sessions. I mean, I'll have sessions with clients where it will be mostly me, like almost completely me talking, and there'll be other sessions where I'm doing a lot of listening. But
mm,
that's if that's an answer to the question, is that's why I don't necessarily have, here's the way I ask these questions, here's the way I
mm,
phrase them, because I'm just talking to them, and as soon as I hear a barrier, I'm like, right, let's look at that. Let's see why. We understand why your subconscious did it. Makes sense, doesn't it? But let's talk about why it doesn't need to then. You know,
mm.
and if we can get a good insight in there, I think normally we can get the barriers down. On a good
So
day.
you kind of have a slight authoritarian leading element to the way that you work
Yeah.
with clients too, don't you?
I suppose when the way I've just described it does sound that way, doesn't it? But I've never thought myself as an authoritarian therapist. I've got to be honest with you, and I do sort of bulk a little bit at that description. But I can see why you'd use it, because it does sound like I'm just dictating terms, doesn't it? But having said that, I think even though I might be very much leading the discussion where I want it to go,
Mm,
when it comes to the actual, what we might say, the change work process, where we're dealing with the subconscious, I am very much not authoritarian. I'm very much kind of like, I am just question and answer to the
mm,
subconscious. And I'm kind of like, I'm offering like yes, no options to the subconscious, and hoping that it's like, yeah, let's do that then. Like, instead of that, kind of thing. I'm kind of letting the subconscious go there. Because at the end of the day, I want the client to finish up the session and be like, yeah,
mm,
I understand why I was doing it now, and I can see why it was completely, whilst it might have seemed like not the best strategy, it's not one that I'm going to call irrational anymore, because there was a reason for it. But now I
mm,
understand why my mind will do it differently. Yeah, and if we've got, I will often say understanding is the antidote. So if we can if
mm,
we can educate the client in the way they need to be educated, then they do the rest themselves.
mm. That's that sort of balance between leading and then letting the client do what it needs
Yeah.
they need to do. And I think a lot of hypnotherapists may be shocked at how authoritarian ish they can be at times, because there will be a solution focus in that session. And if you don't do that, then the client can sort of go nowhere very quickly. Like you've got to rein it in. You've got to kind of point to things that are going to be most effective for that client to be working with in that moment for change to occur.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be. There is a moment, isn't there, where you're now in a position. The client and yourself have sort of maneuvered you into this role where you can literally just tell, their subconscious, you don't have to do that anymore. That
Mm,
let's relieve you of that burden now. Yeah, but I
mm,
think it comes from the truth being laid out here. It's not like we're just going to say, right, because I've hypnotized you, now you're going to
yeah,
stop doing it. Like that can work. We know that can work, but of course, it doesn't necessarily empower the client. It simply disempowers them in a slightly more positive way than they're currently disempowered. So but I think there is a point where everyone in the room knows exactly why this thing isn't the best thing anymore, and what would be the best thing. And then
mm,
maybe at that point, that bit of your mind is just waiting for you to say, okay, you can do it now. You can change that thing. We give you permission to make that final move. And you're right, but they don't come to us so we can just talk around it. They come to us so
mm,
that we can offer them a solution. Yeah.
mm. Quite often I'll say to people, when it just makes sense, it just does, doesn't it? And
Mm.
that's a very Ericksonian, maybe, language
Yeah,
there.
maybe. Yeah.
But it works because
Yeah.
people go, yeah, it does make sense. And
Mm.
things go in.
Yeah.
And that's where you can add in just that in that conversational way. And then you just upgrade, don't you?
Mm.
That's right. So
Exactly.
we,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have these wonderful understandings, I think, of all the greats that have gone before us in the hypnotic
Yeah.
sort of journey of evolution.
Mm.
And we can lean into those from time to time. And I think that's when we get trained, that gives us that basic understanding, but then we get to play. We
Yeah.
get to kind of incorporate it our way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think everyone probably is doing it kind of their own way, aren't they? It's not like
Yeah.
you're ever, no matter how much you might try and be an exact copy of the person that trained you or the book that you read, you're going to bring you to the session. And I'm always saying to my practitioners that I train, it's like that's what we want. I can
Mm,
tell you a load of insights that I give to clients that helps them. I've got a bloody book on anxiety, and there's a load of stuff in there that hopefully when
mm,
people read it about their anxiety, they're like, oh God, I can
mm,
change, can't I? Hopefully that's the moment, there's something that clicks there. But the best
mm,
insights are always the ones that the therapist in that moment, listening to the client in the framework that they're discussing it, is like, oh, you know what thought just occurs to me at this exact moment. So I
mm,
had I had a client that was working again, they were struggling to let go of the idea that perfectionism was a bad thing. Okay,
mm,
even though it kind of condemns us to unhappiness, because unless we're perfect we'll be unhappy and we'll never be perfect. They got all of that concept, but their issue
mm,
was that in business they had always worked on a principle of a platonic ideal. So we work out what would be the perfect version of this business thing that we're trying to achieve. Then we work back to how we get there, and so then we do the process. Yeah, and they work on themselves in that way. And I was like, okay, but you can see why that doesn't apply when it comes to a person. And they were like, well, what do you mean? And just in that moment, at that time, I said, well, so presumably your ideal of you is like fearless. And they're like, yeah, exactly. I could just go and do something. And I said, and courageous. And they were like, yeah, courageous. And I'm like, right, okay, instantly those two concepts aren't compatible. Yeah, you can't be fearless and at the same time have courage, because courage
mm,
comes from overcoming your fears. There has to be fear to be courage. And it was like, I've never said that insight before to somebody that was dealing with perfectionism, but it just came very naturally in that conversation. And that was the
yeah.
thing for that particular client that was like, huh, yeah, of course, I'm trying to be perfect, aren't I? When
Mm,
what would be like the best version of me is inherently, by
mm,
definition, imperfect, because
mm,
we have different traits that help us at different times.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's it, isn't it? It's again, it's a conversation, I think, and that's how it works best.
And for those that are trying to get their head around hypnotherapy and hypno understanding of language and how we use it, what Tim was just saying there was really a classic reframe, but also a challenger question. There
Mm-hmm.
was that there, just breaking them out of trance for a moment and getting them to really think about something.
Yeah.
And then once they have that agreement, then they're back into sort of, I guess, that trance again. So sometimes we need to do that as hypnotherapists, is just challenge sometimes this status quo of thinking. They've
Mm.
been stuck in that paradigm of thinking for such a long time. They've not thought to question, does it even
Yeah.
make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think, what do you currently believe is true that
Mm.
stops you getting where you want to get to? That's the bottom line here, isn't it? That's the barrier. Yeah. The belief that you have that makes what you want unachievable. It's, I don't know. It's, do we think spiders are dangerous things? If we learned that first experience of a spider was mum or dad screaming when they saw a spider, we might have concluded spiders are dangerous, scary things. I know you're in New Zealand, so you probably do have dangerous, scary spiders, but in the
No,
UK,
we don't.
we really don't. Yeah, is it just Australia then? Am I just
Australia, everything that breathes wants to eat you or
in
maim you
Yeah,
in
we don't.
some
I
way.
mean, so we can agree
But
not
no,
to go.
New
But,
Zealand's pretty safe like that. We've got one which
okay,
lives in one area of the country, in areas that you don't really go. It's in the
right.
sand dunes, the bark. It's the redback spider.
Oh, really?
That we've got one there, but it's only in breeding season that they get rather aggressive because they're
Yeah.
protecting
Well,
their
see, in the
eggs.
UK, it's even there's nothing here that in the UK that's going to hurt you. You know what I mean? And yet we have just as many spider phobias as anywhere else. But if we assume just from what we witnessed when we were young that spiders are in some way threatening, then
Mm,
our mind creates a fear of spiders. Yeah, and it's
yeah.
a bit of as you say, oh, I know it's silly, but it's not silly. It's not
Mm,
irrational because there's a reason. Your mind made a conclusion based on an experience. And I think, like you say, it's about saying, oh, what have we assumed is true that we
yeah.
actually shouldn't have to assume. I remember one of my practitioners coming for like a support forum that we run, and they were asking, I'm struggling because the client's saying they need to have courage to overcome their fear of spiders, but they've always been told they're a coward by their dad, and they've never thought themselves
Mm,
as courageous. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. Yeah, you can challenge that absolutely because that's the judgment of a father about a child rather than the adult they are now. But you could also
mm,
say, why do you need courage to overcome something that is not dangerous? I was saying,
mm,
and funny enough, the practitioner I was talking to was also afraid of spiders. So they'd been happy to accept their client's truth that spiders
mm,
are obviously scary things. Yeah, and that was
mm,
that was the barrier there that needed to be removed, was this idea that spiders are in any way inherently scary things. If we can
mm,
remove that, hey, we don't need courage then because we're just around something that can't do us any harm anyway, in the same way we might be around an ant or something like that. So
mm,
yeah, I think it's interesting. That's for me is what I'm trying to find out is what have you maybe assumed or accepted about
mm,
reality that actually doesn't need to be true at all.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, when we're kind of looking at fears and phobias, this is a big part of, I guess, what someone might come in for, not just anxiety in general,
Yeah.
but definitely that phobic side of things, needles and
Yeah.
people vomiting.
Yeah,
It's actually
metaphobia.
more common than you think.
Yeah, it is,
It's
isn't it? Yeah, I think
yeah,
everyone finds that when they go into practice, they're like, I did not realize so many people were afraid of vomit, but there are there. And it's one of those things we
yeah,
can't necessarily. Then they have kids, of course, isn't it? It's always when people have just had kids and they're like, I don't seem to be able to just now avoid situations with vomit involved. But we should
it's
put in a metaphobia warning on this talk now, shouldn't we?
probably.
Yeah.
So when we're kind of looking at I guess eclectic range of things that we do end up working with, I think being a detective, being
Mm,
curious as a detective and
yeah.
asking really great questions
Mm.
that feel organic to that moment. It's not about thinking all of the questions beforehand, because good luck, you're just not going to.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
one. no one can prepare that well.
Yeah,
I think we need to trust in that organic process of unpacking and
absolutely.
journeying in real time with that client. So yes, coming back to the forums that I've seen people ask about, how should I work with? Well, depends on the client,
Mm,
depends on what the client needs.
yeah.
And people all kind of adding in their 10 cents worth or whatever. And it's quite fascinating. I hope that we will evolve as hypnotherapists to really understanding scripts can be really um, inherently flawed
Mm,
because you may be missing something really important that that client might need in that session. And as a hypnotherapist, take your trainer wheels off
mm.
and sort of trust the process,
Yeah,
trust
yeah,
your
yeah,
curiosity, trust the client has the answers, those sort of things.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it is when we if we buy into the framework that the script is the thing. Now, don't get me wrong, you will have success with you can not necessarily guaranteed, but yeah, you can have absolute great success with a script. You hypnotize somebody, you relax them down into trance, whatever you do with your process, your induction, and then you read the script and then you bring them out of hypnosis, yeah, and magically they're not afraid of spiders anymore, yeah. But don't for a moment believe it had anything to do with the words you read from that script. If that's the framework that has worked, it hasn't worked because you said the right words. It worked because you and the client were both completely sold on the idea that when we do this hypnosis thing, that's all I need. Yeah. And
Mhm.
then that bit of your mind said, okay, well, I must be fixed now. And it stopped hitting the fear button in the face of that particular thing, the spider, So, and I think that's, I think because it can work, people forget to question why it would work. Yeah,
Mm.
and I think that's what's more important, and ultimately I think that's why I had to change what I was doing myself, because I couldn't necessarily just do something that I knew why it was working, because I said I was a hypnotist and you came to the hypnotist to get fixed. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
knew that, but I couldn't say that in the session, because it was the sleight of hand that was the trick. It was the
Mm.
hey, here comes the hypnosis thing. So to actually
Mm.
do something now where the client understands, oh, that's why my mind started to respond this way, and now I've looked at it differently, I realize that's why it's going to react differently in the future, because I understand this stuff better now. My belief systems have changed. It's like
Mm.
the classic example of when we thought the earth was flat way back in the day, the sailors of that time would have a genuine fear of falling off the edge of the earth if they sailed into uncharted waters. Now we
Mm.
understand it's round. They don't have that fear. It was the
Mm.
understanding of the globe rather than the disc that caused them to stop having that fear. It wasn't because somebody said the right words to them in the right way at the right time. Yeah, it was because they now have an understanding. And that's what we're
Mm.
looking to convey to our clients. We're looking for
Yeah.
that to be accepted at a belief level. Yeah, the level of
Mm.
actually this is what I regard to be true. Yeah, and then why would your mind react in any other way than the appropriate way of no fear, no anxiety, that's that sort of thing.
I think too, coming out of that example, which is a metaphor, that can help people join the dots. So, a lot of hypnotherapists use metaphor. A lot of them use they're artfully vague. There's a
Yeah.
part of you that knows exactly what's happening, isn't there? Yes. And, you kind of, and you allow that part to change things today. Is that okay? Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very artfully vague. You have no idea what that thing is or what part
Mm,
is going to change, but you're allowing that person permission to go
mm,
play with that concept that they know, and that change can occur and so on. Then you come into the more sort of script bound. So from now on, every time you
yeah, yeah.
um, begin to feel better and better about, and you're very specific, right?
Mm,
So there's sort of so many ways that a hypnotherapist can work with a client, and sometimes it is an eclectic range of all of those things.
yeah.
It's not just one way of working with a client in that hypnotic a sort of language that we're familiar with. I think um, having that agility to understand, again, those basic understandings and then work from there,
Mhm.
I think becomes our strength as hypnotherapists.
Yeah, I think, and for me, always it comes back to this point that it's an interaction,
Mm,
and don't get me wrong, I do appreciate that we need to work for the way that works for the client. We
mm,
have to listen to the client and how they need to work. But I think more than that, we need to work in a way that works for us as a practitioner. Yeah, because and if what's going to work for the client falls within that remit, because there's always a version of what we do, as long as what we do is flexible. Yeah, and
mm,
I don't mean flexible as in, well, if this method doesn't work, I've got this method in my back pocket I can use instead. I mean as flexible as two people having a conversation. Yeah, that's
mm,
all it needs to be. As long as we can take what the client says to us and we can give them something that's of value to them, they can then take that and come back with something they need from us, and we can give that to them. That kind of thing. As long as there's a genuine, functional, solution focused interaction, then
mm,
then we're going to get there, and I think that's what's important about what we do, is that we
mm,
we work in a way that first and foremost we're comfortable working in. Yeah, and if we, this is what, I come in round full circle, if you like, to what we're talking about with the control system. Why I work this way is because I
mm,
know that where everything that I do is based on a direct conversation with the subconscious. Because of that, I know that it doesn't matter what we're dealing with, it doesn't matter who I'm dealing with. I know there's a version of that that will get them where they need to go. And so
mm,
I know I will use the same method with every client, because in the same way that when I want to talk to somebody, I use the same method. I open my mouth and start talking. Yeah, they listen
mm.
and then they talk back and I listen. That's the same method every time. There's a different person, different needs all the time, but it's the same method. And as a result, I know I like that method, and the way that I'm working with the client, so they'll get the best version of me in the midst of
Yeah.
all of that. So yeah, and if that resonates with them, if talking to me resonates with them, then we'll probably get a good result.
Mm. So, thank you for your insight and your time with me today. It's been
Very
really
well.
delightful.
I've enjoyed it. It's been
Um,
lovely.
yeah, yeah. So, I hope everyone out there has sort of gained a little bit of understanding that, yeah, we are all different and we have to be true to ourselves when we're working with clients. And as you go through your hypnotic training, not all trainers are going to train the same either.
Mhm.
And, put your feelers out there and stay curious along this journey, because there are some amazing, more modern approaches potentially and insights that have occurred. And Tim, you're one of those people who's just breaking some of those old ideas and helping people to move away from maybe that more formal trance idea.
Mm.
So thank you for sharing your insights
Very
today.
welcome. Very welcome. Thank you.
Awesome. So if you are interested in training or anything, you can go and visit the nzach.ac.nz website. We've got a new round coming up in February, so I hope you can join us if you are interested. If you are interested in Tim, I will put a little wee link in there that you can go and visit and check out what he's up to as well.
Mm.
So again, thank you everyone for joining us.